Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, dona nobis pacem.
Our topic this morning is truth and freedom. It's taken from the 4th chapter of Deacon Harold Burke Siver's book, Behold the Man. If you haven't read the book and you choose to, be prepared for a bit of a theological journey. He's pretty deep in the theology and weaving manhood and the idea of being a man in the context of the catechetical teachings of the church and the theology, and he goes into it fairly well. This will be a little theological in its approach, so bear with me. It, in my opinion, is wonderfully clear. I hope that I've been able to distill it. Chapter 4 has a foundational premise. There's a quotation from the Catechism of the Church, paragraph 1730, that forms the foundation of this paragraph and of this chapter and of this talk, and I'd like to read it to you. The Catholic Catechism, paragraph 1730, quote, God created man a rational being, conferring on him the dignity of a person who can initiate and control his own actions. God willed that man should be left in the hand of his own counsel, so that he might of his own accord seek his Creator and freely attain his full and blessed perfection by cleaving to him. Man is rational and therefore like God. He is created with free will and is master over his own acts, unquote. So there are two phrases to flag in this. The first phrase is, freely attain his full and blessed perfection. And the second phrase is, created with free will. Within this paragraph, then, we find that there's there's an implied and a deep need to understand then what free really means. And that is the foundational direction that Deacon took in this chapter. Hence the title, Truth and Freedom. So the first thing that he explores is the idea of our nature. First of all, we realize we're created. So we need to understand freedom in the context of being created. There's an implicit and an explicit dependence then on the being that created us. We don't have what we have independent of our creatureliness. And so we need to understand that. We could have been created without a will, as the animals are created. Rather, it's simply instinct. But no, we were created with a will, the ability to rationally act on our own. So then, how free are we? What does this freedom mean? What does this will, this free will, give to us? Well, it gives us the ability so far within our freedom to reject the very being, the very creator who created us. That is how free we are. We can literally reject him. We can say no to our creator. We can say no to the being that sustains us. That is the depth. That is the measure. That is a picture of how great God's love and respect and honor is for us, that we can reject him. Think about it. The fact that we can sin is an indicator of how greatly he honors our independence, our ability to choose to brace him, our freedom. So, our human nature is enormously a gift to us. So then, what he did was, let's consider this freedom we have from two different perspectives. First, let's think about it from the personal and subjective. The phrase liberté, égalité, fraternité, the motto of France, finding its roots, trying to find out who it was during the French Revolution. In essence, it says, what can I do? When can I do it? And who's going to stop me from doing it? In the French Revolution, there was a presumption on the inherent goodness of man, and that he's created in the image of God and the likeness of God. And there's the hope that most men, most of the time, will seek for the good. But in our efforts of seeking for good, what good do we seek for? Is it the good for me? Is it the good for you? Is it the good that you perceive, that I think that you're seeing? Is it the good of our relationship? Is it the good of the situation? What good are we seeking? Or is the good we're seeking in a circumstance the good prescribed by God? And so when we look at the personal and subjective modality of freedom, we understand that we're driven to decide. You and I have to decide what we're going to do in a specific circumstance. We have to choose a good. What good is it that we're going to seek? Is it going to be the good that we define, which may or may not be good? It may be okay, but it's probably not going to be the highest good, which we should be considering to be the will of God. So, personal and subjective thinking, personal and subjective approach to truth and good and freedom is not going to necessarily lead us to the good, the capital good, because we have a cloud around us. There is a veil around us, and we touched on that. We have sin in our lives. Concupiscence is wrapped around us. There is a tendency within us, because of original sin, to move towards sin. We want to pursue good. We want to pursue right. But we don't always pursue the biggest right, the biggest good, the capital good of God. So from the personal and subjective sense of freedom, we're bound more and more, hopefully, by freedom from that veil of sin, but nonetheless that veil of sin surrounds us. But Deacon puts forth the interpersonal and objective sense of freedom. And the fulfillment of that is found in this phrase, quote, I have come not to do my own will, but to do the will of him who sent me, unquote. John 3:38. I have come to do not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. And so in the interpersonal and objective idea of freedom, we find that the richest image and message of freedom is the Trinitarian persons we call God. They have unique roles within their nature, equal in power, equal in love, equal in direction, equal in mission, but they each embrace the specificity of their individual roles without jealousy, without envy, without infighting, with total cooperation. And that very love, that very action of being, just their being, leads to giving life. The church speaks, when she speaks of God, in the fecundity, the rich life-giving capacity of God. And not only does it give life, but it gives abundant life. Huge life, huge ability to bring newness, opportunity, all of that. And it springs forth. It must be. It is a requirement of God that life be. And so when we look at that interpersonal idea of freedom, that relationship that fosters in that relation, in the context of that freedom, is life itself. And so we see that with the very essence of, as the very essence of God. And that has been placed in us, that ability to see that freedom, the natural law, that human expression of this essence of God in our everyday life. We see it. That tendency, although it's a fight against sin, there is still a tendency and a yearning within us to do the right, to do the good. So the natural law is written within us, and just even in our sinfulness, we have that tendency. And so we can conclude from this interpersonal and objective perspective that freedom is seeing the fullness of what is, the fullness of it. Not just my perspective, not just your perspective, not just the situational perspective, but the fullness of what is going on at every moment in our lives. The ultimate good, truth, another name for it, wisdom, another name for it, or God. The ability to see and choose the good. So freedom is the ability to choose and see the good. So then, Deacon addresses how do we become free. First of all, we need to acknowledge our creatureliness. We need to acknowledge that at any given time we only carry part of the picture with us. We need help. We need to regularly call for the help of God in our activities. We also need to acknowledge our need for the interpersonal. We need relationship. We need relationship to achieve the good, to achieve right, to achieve freedom. Particularly, we need our relationship with God, with our Creator, who by decree and action, our very createdness, our very human nature, desires us to freely choose Him. He didn't impose that upon us, and He never imposes upon us that we choose Him. But rather, He desires that we choose Him, and we constantly go to Him, and that He will foster that relationship. We need to become free to pursue that which is God, life. The result of God, the action of God, the consequence of God's being, that His very existence brings to us life. And so, within a situation, it's incumbent upon us as rational beings to regularly pursue truth. But Pilate asked that wonderful question, truth. What is truth? How do we know that? Well, Deacon goes into it and he says, because of sin, you and I live mired in that veil, that concupiscence. We don't always know what is true. We do, however, get part of the truth, and we know that. We know that we get part of the truth, and we must continue to pursue our ability to understand part of the truth as we move forward. But we also have to do is that we need to seek guidance, the wisdom of what is. So we need to acknowledge that what God has established for us is a body of knowledge, a body of people, the church. The church is a body. So there is temporal wisdom that is present to us today in the magisterium. The Pope, the bishops, the priests, within the context of the body of the church, present today, available to us, that temporal knowledge. But there is an eternal knowledge that is available to us. The knowledge of the historical teachings of the church, the magisterium in the saints, in the writings of the doctors of the church and all of the great men and women who have journeyed through this life and have encountered the very same issues that we are seeing and that we are living through. And so we need to pursue our growth in understanding and our growth in pursuit of good and freedom in what the church holds for us, that body that God has created for us to live within in interpersonal relationships, to grow objectively in our pursuit of truth. This next way that we can pursue this truth is to understand the second person of the Blessed Trinity. Jesus spent an eternity in love with the Father and the Holy Spirit. One apparent aspect of that eternal love yields our creation, our universe, our very existence. It's not the fullness of who Jesus is, but it certainly expresses that. And what we need to understand is Jesus knows all about this universe. He knows all about us. He was there at its thought. He was there at its inception. He spoke it into being. He's the life force, along with the Father and the Holy Spirit, that sustains its existence. The second person of the Holy Trinity, through a supreme act of love, then, in a desire to fulfill the will of the Father, takes on the role of reintegrating us into that relationship when we destroyed it. He chose to humble himself, the unbounded, indescribable, enormous God chose to delineate himself for a period of time in the form of his very creatures to buy us back. We need to think about those things, those high and lofty thoughts, and the enormity of God's action on our behalf. That he has an unbounded love that he bound deliberately to express to us his admiration, his love, his dying love for us. He is our lover creator. He didn't just create for the sake of having subjects, but he created for the sake of relationship. I invite you to read Philippians 2, verses 6 through 11. It's a lovely expression of the person of Jesus Christ and his desire and relationship with us. So, in creature's form, the Son of God repeatedly lived out, day to day, the witness of the possibility of man's relationship to God. Day to day, he showed us. And some of those relationship expressions were written for us. Some were not. Some of those expression relationships, for example, what we heard Sunday in the Beatitudes, were expressed in a universal way for us to hear for all eternity, and so they were given to mankind. But Jesus, the Son of God and the Son of Man, came to particular men and women, individual men and women, and says that he will come to us now as particular and individual men and women to show us the truth. He came to give us an example. He came to set us free, to expose to us the fullness of truth. Jesus then, by his act of profound humility, of assuming the form of man, raises up the eternal dignity of humanity. He shows us how deeply the Father loves us. And as we've said a number of times of late, that the saints of the church reflect on that and tell us then that Jesus, in his act of love, desires us to be quote-unquote God. He desires us to be so much like the Father and to be so integrated into the Trinitarian relationship that we too would become God-like. Hard to get your head around, but it is the call of Christ, and it is the truth that we need to look at as we seek to understand what it means to be free. So then, let's look at some practical images of freedom. First, let's look through the eyes of Jesus, or rather through the person of Jesus. The natural law within us drives us to want to be free and to know the truth. I want to know what is true. I want to know what is good. I am driven to be right, not because I want to win, but because when I'm right, I'm at peace with the law that reigns within me. I want peace in my life, and so I want to be honorable and right and good. When I look for the right, when I look for the truth in a matter, not what will solve the symptoms of the situation, but what's the truth? Sometimes very hard to see. I will find peace. And the more I yearn for that truth, I am free to know that I have sought the good and God. And so, when we look at Jesus' life, we see that he's always looking to pursue the truth of the situation, the truth for the individual that he speaks to. He's never trying to just smash someone, but rather raise them up to the fullness of the possibility of their relationship with the Father, always leading people to the truth of their end. And that end is for our eternal existence with the Father. And as I look at Jesus' life, I see that he promised me that I can do as he has done. He promised me that I can move a mountain. He promised me that if I ask and seek, I will find. I don't know about you, but I have indeed sought and found. I have sought to move mountains, and the mountains of hate that filled my heart are now closer to lush valleys than they are mountain barriers between me and God. I'm not telling you there aren't a few buttes here. I'm not telling you there aren't a few ruts. There are. But the mountains, if they're not at least buttes, they might be little hills that can be climbed over. But there are changes when I seek and when I ask. The positive changes, yes, in my life are tempered by the sinful veil that interferes. And so I have to continue to seek. But when I seek after Jesus, I find the truth in situations that will bring freedom to the circumstances. Another practical image, family life, and the deacon spent a great deal of time in speaking about this, in large measure towards the end of this little section. He brings up the idea that human lovemaking is highly pleasurable. It creates a deep and lasting and pretty permanent emotional bond between the partners. Human lovemaking is a good in itself. It is a good in itself. A fecund result of that human love is the gift of an independent life. Much like the love between the Father and Son and Father and Spirit and Jesus and the Spirit, life, an independent life is formed. Independent lives are regularly being formed in action with God. Relationship brings life. It is a good. An even greater and arguably the greatest end of the relationship in a couple anyway is that independent life that is formed, that third being. It raises the relationship, again, to that level of godliness, creatingness, the ability to bring life. And in our time, abortion, an act instituted to accentuate the first good, with freedom to not participate in the other two results of love. The veil of sin clouds our time. I know we understand that, most of us in this room. But 58 million people have died since Roe v. Wade. And the March for Life just this past week highlighted the idea of continuing the fight to pursue truth. And so Deacon encouraged us to pursue the truth of life, its beauty, its value, its need, and that we must, as men, fight that battle to sustain life itself. Let's look at an anti-image of freedom, and that's moral relativism. Moral behavior for our history has been based on what is permitted by the masses. Moral relativism, what do people say it is? Something akin to democracy. Arguably, those behaviors are driven by the elite, whose taste and penchants usually influence the culture. We see that in movie actors and the virtual adoration that is given to some of them. From the time of God's breaking into history, however, he has told us time and again that moral behavior ought to be based on our giftedness as a being, the beingness that we received from God. Before Jesus, the Father sent his prophets. With and after Jesus, God has definitively communicated to us the way of perfection. It's the love of God and his creatures, man. Many behaviors today are touted as good: self-sufficiency, personal liberty, unfettered knowledge, unbounded knowledge, unbounded by the truth of God's creating action in the world. A pursuit of happiness. Each of those four are goods of themselves. But are they properly applied by us even in our pursuit of good? So in truth then, what is it that we have to do in this moral relativistic world? I think we have to remember that we have to keep in mind the end game. What is our purpose? Is it worldly success in achieving all that I desire? Or is it achieving the end for which I have been made, which is written upon my immortal soul and is evident to me in the natural law? So when I'm pursuing truth, when I want to be free, what am I pursuing? When looked at with the end in mind, you and I will be able to grow more and more to see the truth in circumstances and consequently be free. Last area, some practical actions that we can take to continue our growth, to foster our growth in freedom and our pursuit of truth. The first thing, pray. However, there are a myriad of prayer forms that exist within the church. Explore a new form this year. Add it to your repertoire. Don't give up the forms you use, but think about other prayer forms. If you don't pray the Divine Chaplet, think about it. If you don't pray the Liturgy of the Hours, look into it. If you aren't attending Mass during the week, add a Mass or two, or daily Mass during the week. Ignatian spirituality, Franciscan spirituality, Benedictine spirituality. There are, again, a myriad of ways. Consider expanding your prayer forms this year. After all, you need to get in the practice. It's what you're going to be doing for eternity. It's worth getting in some practice time. It's kind of cool. Pursue knowledge. Pursue knowledge in fields outside the church. Be aware of what's going on. As it were, be a man of letters. Look at what's going on and understand some area that you might know. Of like mind, however, pursue knowledge matters within the church. Read church council documents, teachings of a particular saint. Read perhaps about the 34 doctors of the church and read some of their even summaries of what they have taught and their impact. Recently, St. Thomas Aquinas on January 28th is the saint of that day. Read some of Thomas's stuff. It's tough, but pursue that. The deacon talks about pursuing the virtues, in particular the 4 cardinal virtues. Pursue growth in prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice, that you and I might be examples of Christ in the world as we interact in our relationships with others. Pursue the Eucharist, literally thanksgiving. Be a Eucharistic man. Be thankful for your family. Be thankful for your church. Be thankful for your work. Be thankful for your social life. And be thankful in each of these. And finally, believe that you are passionately loved. Look at the cross for you. A passionate love for you. Then try to passionately love back. Try, as you grow in your pursuit of truth and freedom, try as you seek to be a life giver, to passionately love the truth, to seek it and not be afraid of it, and believe that you are loved, and consequently are able to love with that same passion those men and women that God puts in your life.
Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata